For more insight now into the Iranian crisis, we are joined by Arang Keshavarzian, an associate professor of Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies at New York University and an editor of the Middle East Report Journal. And Professor Keshavarzian was in Iran for the recent elections. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
When you were in Iran, in the build-up to the elections, was there any indication that this story would explode, that this internal crisis would happen?
Well, initially, about a couple of weeks before the election, I think most analysts and ordinary Iranians expected that the turnout would be quite low and Ahmadinejad would go on to win the election quite handily. However, there were a couple of events that really changed the tide and gave people an inkling that things were different. One was these televised debates amongst all the presidential candidates that really exposed the deep divisions amongst the establishment of the Islamic Republic. And the second set of events were a whole series of large rallies organized by the Mousavi campaign that demonstrated to many ordinary Iranians who may have not planned to vote that in fact the Mousavi campaign was well organized and was a viable candidate that could actually potentially win.
In terms of understanding this crisis, what point do you think is most lacking in the news coverage that Americans are receiving?
I think one of my concerns is that much of the media has described these events as a battle, a conflict between the government and the people. But what's essential to understand is that the conflict is also amongst the elites of the Islamic Republic, the cornerstones of this regime going back to 1979. It's not simply a conflict between the people and the regime. It's a conflict within the regime of what the Islamic Republic is, what the legacy of the Islamic Revolution should be.
Do you think these rallies, these street protests, will they continue?
It's quite clear that the government has the ability and the willingness to suppress the street protests, and we've already seen that they've fewer of them, they're more sporadic. So for the protests to succeed, they really will have to come up with alternative ways to express their dissent, whether it's through strikes or other forms of civil disobedience, such as we've seen, for instance, going to the rooftops and chanting Allahu Akbar or God is great. And the strategists and the opposition leaders are already discussing and planning such alternative forms of civil disobedience.
Well, what kind of strikes are we talking about, and how would they have the sort of large impact that I would think you'd want to have?
Absolutely. I mean, small-scale strikes can also be suppressed, just like these rallies have been. I think the areas that have some potential for strikes are the large manufacturing districts surrounding Tehran and Esfahan, for instance. There is some indication that workers are sympathetic to some of these political protesters. Even the private sector business community is also critical of Ahmadinejad. So there's potential there. Another important group is, for instance, the bus drivers that have engaged in economic and political actions in recent years. And they may be a group that would be willing to go on strike.
Arang Keshavarzian, thank you very much.
Thank you.